Hello, my name is Jawad Ali, and in this video, I will be talking about risk identification problems. Before I move on towards the problem, I just want to briefly discuss risk identification definition just so that we are clear. So, for beginners, the definition of risk identification is finding potential negative events that could disrupt your objectives. You have objectives in your organizations, there are problems that can happen, there are events that can happen, and those events will negatively impact your objectives. For example, you have a database for CRM, and a hacker comes in and the database is stolen and database is encrypted, so you're not able to use it, and it disrupts your objectives or of marketing and sales. So this is about risk identification. Another thing I want to add to the definition is that it's not just about finding potential negative events. No, it's not just about those. It's about specific type of events. What type of? Relevant, unique, probable, and right number of scenarios. Now, you might be confused with scenarios, but you just consider scenario as an event, as a potential event that can happen in the future. So this is about risk identification. Now, let's move on to toward the problems. Here are some of the problems I've listed. These are not the exhaustive list, but these are the most common problems. So I will start with the vague scenarios. You may have a situation where the risk scenario is just too unclear. I mean, it consists of two, three words, and for example, hacker attack our systems. It just don't make any sense. I mean, hacker attacking your system, we face data breaches, in risk, you need likelihood and impact. But these things are so unclear that it's hard to assign likelihood and impact to it. Even if you assign likelihood and impact, it just don't carry any meaning. So they are useless to the organization. They cannot inform any decision. Hackers attack our systems. What kind of system are you talking about? What kind of hackers are you talking about? What do you mean by attack? So you cannot use it in in a decision because these analyses will be useless. Another problem is incorrect structure. So I think this is similar to the wake scenarios, but in this one, you are also using wording and, for example, saying that hacker is a threat, or you are saying phishing is a threat. For example, you are saying ransomware is a risk. So these kind of wording or structuring of scenarios similar to the first one of vague scenarios are not useful because it's very hard to assign likelihood and impact. Even if you assign likelihood and impact, what kind of decision it will support? For example, our customer data is at risk. What are you talking about? There are many threat actors, and that can impact customer data in many ways. So what are you talking about? It's not clear. So it's an asset, not a risk. Phishing email is a risk. Well, what are you talking about? What kind of phishing? To what risk? So this is unclear events, and you can I have termed it as incorrect structure, but they are very similar to the vague scenarios. The third problem is irrelevant scenarios. Well, you have a scope, and your job is to find the most important risks in that scope. But instead of focusing on the most relevant scenarios, you are focusing on the irrelevant scenarios. For example, in a healthcare provider, you are writing loss of cafeteria payment system in the risk register, which is not of concern because it's a small operational inconvenience. And what is ignored? The most important asset, which was the electronic health record database, that if ransomed halts patient care, that was ignored. But you are including scenarios like loss of cafeteria payment system. It just doesn't make any sense. The other one is ransomware on employee laptops. So you can saying laptop malwares and endpoint security risk, but yeah, if your scope is cloud security, imagine that you are a risk professional is invited, is hired to perform risk identification on a cloud hosted HR system, and you are talking about ransomware on employee laptops. That's not cloud. It's just these are irrelevant. So Just understand what my point is. You are creating scenarios that just don't apply to the scope. You have a scope, you have you have a objective for risk, and you are not focusing on it. You are focusing on something else. Overlapping and redundant scenarios. You are creating the same scenarios again in with different words. For example, phishing email leads to credential theft. Well, this is one way. Another way, you are just reframing it and saying staff trick by email gives away password. That's the same thing. User receives malicious link in email that captures login. As you can see, these are all the same scenarios, just with use different wording. So you can have just one scenario as opposed to just creating three scenarios. This is one problem. This is actually an important problem. Overlapping and redundant scenarios. Just you need to make sure that scenarios are unique. They are not redundant. Not important scenarios. So I think it is also important from the irrelevant area. It is similar to the irrelevant scenarios. And here, the scenarios may be relevant, but they are just not important. Consider the example data center humidity fluctuation damaging servers. Well, this is a possible event, but just for example, if the hospital has migrated 90% of the workloads to cloud service providers, you could focus on something better, something more important, instead of just saying data center humidity fluctuations. So you could focus on cloud where you have data migrated. Another is website defacement of the corporate block. So you have a manufacturing sector organization and you are focusing on a risk website defacement of corporate block. Well, this is a risk, but it's not critical risk. It's not an important one. The important one would be, the supply chain contracts, the manufacturing disruptions. That's what, disruption of industrial control system. So that's the kind of risk you should be talking about, not something that's not important. So this is one scenario. You're just listing non-important scenarios and you are just wasting your time on those scenarios. Those scenarios just don't make any sense. Business leaders won't be happy seeing you with that kind of risk register and too many scenarios. So you are just creating too many scenarios, even though the scenarios are relevant, but you are just doing it too detailed. For example, instead of saying phishing email from Nigerian prince, from a fake CEO, from HR spoof. So some of the scenarios could be relevant. They may not be redundant. They may be, important scenarios, but you are just going too detailed, for example, or the scope is not clear. So it is a situation. Instead of saying, for example, you could group all these things together, which is the phishing email from fake CEO. Instead of saying this into five scenarios, you could just group them into phishing leads to credential theft of malware delivery. So this is, too many scenarios. Too many scenarios could be overwhelming number of scenarios that cannot be analyzed adequately. For example, you're doing semi-quantitative, qualitative, and you want to base your decisions based on some data, even if it's qualitative, and you're creating like 100 scenarios, it's hard to do this, accurately. So just focus on scenarios that truly matter. Don't have to be too detailed, too many scenarios. Just focus on scenarios that truly matter. Now let's discuss. This is actually the problems and some of the examples that I have given for those problems. Now let's move on towards the actual solution to the problems. So the first one is you have vague scenarios and creating vague scenarios with unclear scope that cannot be answered. So how can we fix this? We can fix this with two things. We already know that the scope is so clear scope and follow a structure. Make sure that the scope is clear. Like we said, the scope is not clear. You're not sure what are you doing in risk. What do you have to include in risk? You're not sure. So what do you do to fix the problem? Well, you make yourself sure what are you doing. So it's about the scope, fixing the scope, making sure you are aware of a scope. And another thing would be following a structure. What do I mean by the structure? This I have already mentioned that risk identification consists of events. Those events are called scenarios. And in order to scenario to be very detailed, you don't want to just use a vague scenario. For example, instead of saying hackers attack our system, You are being detailed. An external attacker exploits an unpatched vulnerability in the web portal to steal customer data, causing regulatory and reputational impact. It's very detailed. Instead of saying hackers attack our systems. So, how do you do this? Adding structure. And what do I mean by structure? You are including threat. What kind of threat can do this? What asset is involved? How can the threat impact the asset? How the threat is impacting the asset? And what happens when the asset is impacted? What is the effect? What is the business impact? What is the asset impact? So just using this for every scenario, like this threat, asset, method, and effects, you make sure that the scenario is not vague. So this is the answer to the problem of vague scenarios. So we have another problem of incorrect structure, and I think this one's is the same. Uh, is the previous one. You just make sure that the scope is clear and you follow a structure. When you do that, you make sure that the structure is correct. These problems are very identical, could be the same problem. As an example, our customer data is at risk, is a risk. So you are saying that's not bad. That's not a good scenario. As you can see, it's very vague. It's what kind of customer data are you talking about? What kind of risk are you talking about? Where it is located and how it can be impacted. It's not clear. A good way of reframing this would be phishing compromises staff accounts, allowing attackers to access customer data in the CRM system, leading to a privacy breach. It's more clear now. You can see that you have details here that phishing compromised staff accounts. You have phishing, so that's a threat. And it's also it's a method. So we don't have a threat actor, but you can also say that cyber criminals use phishing to compromise staff accounts. And of course, what does it do? Allowing attackers to access customer data. So, yeah, you are including threat, you're including method, the staff accounts, and of course, the business impact, which is the privacy breach. The customer data, this is the asset impact, and the privacy breach, this is the business impact. All right. um, Irrelevant scenarios. So, like I mentioned, you are not focusing on the scenarios you should be focusing on. The scenarios just are not relevant. Okay, this is not relevant to the scope or the impact that you think. So this is that situation. How do you fix it? Well, in order to make sure that you focus on the relevant scenarios, you need to have a well-defined scope. You need to know what area are you going to focus on, what type of effects are you going to focus on, and so well-defined scope. And another thing I think would be very useful is the list of threats, asset, methods, effects in the scope. When you have a list of what threats are you going to focus on, so you do your research and find the relevant threat actors. You also do some research in the internal organization and say and find out what kind of assets are important. So, what methods apply to you and what is the effect that the stakeholders are concerned. So, what do you do? Find the list. When you do that, you can create very relevant scenarios. As an example, instead of saying laws of cafeteria payment system, it's a very irrelevant system, depending on the scope. So you're saying, all right, you were ignoring the electronic health record system, which you should be doing, but you are not doing that. So you focus on where ransomware infects the electronic health record system, halting access to the patient data and disrupting medical services. So it's way more clear, even though the threat actor is not included, but you get the idea that you can create, once you find the relevant threats, asset, methods, and effects list, you can then focus on and create scenarios that are very relevant as opposed to being very remote. All right. Another one is overlapping and redundant. And I think this can be fixed by just checking scenarios. Before you do risk analysis, just make sure you give a quick look at the scenarios and make sure that they are unique. And if they are not unique, you remove unnecessary scenarios before risk analysis. So that's all. For example, phishing email, this is the same thing. And you're instead of focusing on this, you're saying phishing emails trick employees into revealing credentials, enabling threat actors, attackers to access internal systems. So that's how you do it. All right. Non-important scenarios. This is another problem that we face. So, you know, in order to focus on the important scenarios, this is what you can do. In the irrelevant scenarios, I have mentioned this creating a list of threats, assets, and methods effects. What you can do with this list that you can make it prioritize. So you order the events in the order of importance. The most important threat actors are listed first, and same goes for asset, for effect, and for method. When you modify the list this way, you create it, prioritize it, and you process it accordingly. This makes sure that you address the important risks first. So yeah, instead of focusing on data center humidity fluctuation, which is actually a relevant risk, but it's not important. So you are focusing on the area, the right risk that is of concern, which is, for example, compromised IoT devices in hospital wards, provide a taker a foothold to deploy ransomware, disrupting patient care. This is a really serious scenario. So yeah, I mean, when you modify the list in this way, you can create very relevant scenarios that are actually very prioritized and very important. In too many scenarios, this is another problem that we're facing. And I think this is one area that can be a bit tricky. uh, the way I see it is that uh, it can arise from too many components in a risk scenario, or the components are too detailed. So here is how you can do this. Instead of focusing on just very detailed scenarios of the same thing, which is phishing email from Nigerian press, from HR spoof, malicious attachment, what are you focusing what you should focus on is you need just one scenario that can replace all these different scenarios. And the phishing campaigns deliver a malicious link or attachment that result in credential theft or malware installation. This is a pretty good scenario that can replace the above scenarios. So that's what you can do. I mean, this is of course not an exhaustive list. This is just the some of the ways that you can help. 'Cause you can use some of the ways you can use to fix the problems. And these are the problems associated with risk scenarios. I wanted to discuss this thing because it's so important. Um, if you are a student, if you are aware of this risk management, you know that risk identification comes first. After this process, you have risk analysis, and where you are trying to establish the level of risk. And there is risk evaluation, then there is risk treatment. And these processes, risk analysis and risk treatment, are very resource intensive. So you are using a lot of resources. The problem, if you get this risk identification wrong, the resources you use in risk analysis and risk treatment will be wasted. So getting this right, in my opinion, helps, because the downstream process components that uses risk identification will be automatically wrong, and it will be a waste of resources. So just take some time to see if you can help fix these problems if you are in this risk area, and you are responsible for risk identification. Using this fair structure, in my opinion, would be very good. So it's like saying threat impacts asset via method causing an effect. So all the scenarios that I have listed here, most of them follow the same structure. Sometimes you don't have a cyber criminal, but that's okay, or maybe a threat actor. But generally, that's how the structure is. It creates very detailed and relevant scenarios that are useful. It's not just about relevant scenarios. Remember, it's about relevant, unique, probable, and right number of scenarios. So that it's useful. All right, so that's what it for this video. I think if you like this video, please provide feedback in the comment section. If there's something I can improve, I would really appreciate. Thank you very much. That was it for this video.